In 1832, while the cholera epidemic raged in England, the small village of Greystone lay in the shadow of doom. The disease came like a thief in the night, silent but deadly. At first, it was just a strange taste in the water of the old fountain on the market square. Some said it tasted metallic, others described it as bitter. But no one listened to the warnings of the old people who had long said that the well was cursed. The first victims died quickly. It started with nausea, then came the cramps, and finally, the inexorable death. Their once healthy flesh turned gray, their lips bluish, and their eyes lost the last glimmer of life. The dead piled up, and the living hardly dared to leave their homes. But not all the villagers stayed away from the well. A group of children continued to play nearby, undeterred by the warnings of the adults. It was their secret place, a place that belonged to them. But they were doing more than just playing. They claimed to hear voices from the depths. "It sounds like songs," said little Alice, a girl with blonde curls matted with dirt and sweat. Her blue eyes gleamed with a strange mixture of fascination and fear. "They say we should come. They say they can help us." The adults just laughed, waved it off, and blamed it on the children's fertile imaginations. Until Alice disappeared. Her brother Jacob was the first to notice the change. The night Alice disappeared, he woke his parents with a trembling voice. "I heard her," he whispered, almost seeming to be a ghost himself. He was so pale. "She was outside, at the well. She was calling. She said it was beautiful down there. She said,
Hey, come closer.
to come." His words were like an icy breath that filled the room, but his parents scolded him, calling it a bad dream. The next morning, Alice, or what was left of her, was found. Her little body lay twisted at the foot of the well as if something had broken her from the inside out. Her face, however, her face was the worst. It was contorted into a grotesque smile, a grimace of unearthly happiness that made the men and women turn away. But when they tried to retrieve her, it happened. A whisper rose from the depths, so soft that at first it seemed like the wind. But then it became clearer, more melodic, a sweet sound that filled her thoughts. "Come to us," the voices purred, harmonious and ominous at the same time. "We will take you in. There is no pain here, no death, only peace." The men stared into the darkness of the well, their hands trembling. Some broke down crying, while others stepped closer as if mesmerized. They never told anyone what they saw down there, but from that day on, no one returned to the vicinity of the well without a care in the world. From that day on, fewer and fewer villagers dared to go near the fountain, but the voices did not diminish. At night, when darkness crept over the village, the whispering seemed to become louder and more insistent. It was no longer a simple whisper. It sounded as if countless throats were whispering at the same time, each with a different message. Some villagers claimed to have heard their deceased loved ones calling out to them in soft but insistent voices. Others were certain that the voices had promised them healing, not just from cholera, but from every ailment that plagued them. The only condition, they had to come. At first, it was the weak who gave in. The young farmer Elias, to whom the voices promised the survival of his sick daughter, was found one night in front of the well, his hands bloodied from trying to dig into the stone. He just mumbled, "She called me. I have to get her." Others began to behave strangely, whispering unintelligible words as they watched their neighbors suspiciously. Then there was the old priest, always the most sensible of them all, his support in the worst of times. But one night he knelt in front of the well, his arms spread wide. "It's a gate," he cried, with a mixture of despair and ecstasy. "A gateway to salvation." When the others tried to pull him back, he just laughed, an eerie, tinkling laugh, and jumped headfirst into the dark depths. Not a sound came back. It was the young Dr. William Clark who wanted to find out the truth. With a lantern and a rope, he lowered himself into the well, accompanied by the silent prayers of the few survivors. The water smelled of rot, and the walls were damp and slippery. But the voices, they were as clear as if they were speaking right next to him. "Welcome, William," they whispered. "We've been expecting you." He shivered, barely able to hold the lantern steady, but he continued to descend. The air grew colder, the water came up to his waist, and then he saw it. There was no healing spring at the bottom of the well, no magical gate. Instead, he found a pile of corpses, swollen and horribly disfigured. But they were not dead. Their mouths moved, their eyes sparkled, and whispers came from their throats. It was not a choir of angels, as the villagers had believed. It was the song of the desperate, the damned, who rotted deep in the darkness and wanted to drag others into their abyss. William screamed and tried to grab the ropes, but a cold, clammy hand closed around his ankle. "Stay with us," they whispered. "Stay forever." When the villagers pulled back the rope, William had disappeared. All they found was the lantern, still glowing dimly, and the echo of his last scream. The next morning, the last survivors left the village. They left the dead behind and avoided the well, which was now silent. But on the cold nights when the wind whistles through the ruins of Greystone, some travelers swear they can hear a whisper. It sounds sweet, almost like a promise, but the wise know it's better not to listen.